Kehilat Shalom. So before my talk, I'll say a couple of words. You may have noticed that I rolled the owl closer to here. And for those of you who may not understand why I did that, because the way we because we've done a lot of experimentation trying to get the best possible sound, and we have the owl normally now very close to the reader's desk because it picks up the davening very nicely, and we figure that the davening, it's more important that people hear the davening, and if they can't hear the sermon a little bit off, no big deal. But people have been saying to me that it's really a problem, that they're having a problem hearing it, and I'm singing all different things and put another podium here. And then the Spirit of the Lord came unto me and said, "Oh, mortal, the owl is on a cart and the cart has wheels." So, those of you listening to this on Zoom, please, after Shabbos is over, let me know if that resolved the problem. Resolved it, it's a multiple choice. Resolved it completely, resolved it not at all. Okay, and so please let me know. Okay, so the Spirit of the Lord spoke to me, right? And what, I don't know, I've told you this story before, that when we lived in Baltimore, Kelly came home from work one day and found me struggling to move our big, massive, heavy wrought iron bed a couple of inches to the left. And she came in and she said, "What the heck are you doing?" And I said, "Well, the bed is too far from my nightstand, so I'm trying to move the bed closer to the nightstand." And she said, "First of all, if you do that, it'll be too far from my nightstand. And second of all, just move the nightstand closer to the bed." Right? And I don't know, my brain works in mysterious ways. But God told me to move that closer. But it raises an issue, and I have been really struggling, and no joke, with this question for a long time. I mean, you may remember a few years ago, back before the pandemic, Dr. Conrad and I did a Saturday night program, Do We Have Free Will? Right? Do we have free will? Right? Because Judaism certainly tells us that we have free will. But if you look at how our patterns are ingrained and people suffer from all kinds of mental illnesses and syndromes and so on and so forth, do we really have free will? Right? Or is everything that we do sort of predestined, not necessarily by God, but by the fact, for example, that all of us are adult children of parents, right? We're all adult children of parents, right? And our parents do stuff to us, I mean, for better or for worse. And, we're all people who grew up in a certain environment, right? So, the question, and of course for psychiatrists, is really relevant because sometimes somebody pleads insanity, right? And then the psychiatrist has to come in and testify because we have the insanity defense. Why do we have the insanity defense? Because if you can't control your actions, you're not supposed to be punished for them, right? And this is true in halakha as well. Anus Rahmana Patre. God exempts those who act under duress, right? Now, when we get to this week's Parsha, that's really a problem, right? Because God goes heart, right? And if God hardened Pharaoh's heart, how is it fair to punish Pharaoh for something essentially God made him do, right? And God made Pharaoh do it and then punish not only Pharaoh, but the entire nation of Egypt. Okay, so what do? We spilled 10 drops of wine at the Seder, right? And that resolves the problem, right? Except it doesn't resolve the problem, right? It's a problem. And so the commentators know that the first 5 plagues, and we didn't read all 5 of them, but today we read 3, but they're in this Parsha. What does it say? It says, Pharaoh hardened his heart. In other words, the first 5 plagues, the hardening of the heart was done by Pharaoh himself, right? It's only for the second 5 does the Torah say harden Pharaoh's heart, right? So this is a little bit easier to understand, right? Because the pattern was set and then he couldn't break it, right? And we know that this is true for many patterns of behavior, right? You tell a lie and you don't want to get caught, so you tell another lie, right? You steal money from your job, right? And then you're afraid that you're going to get caught. So what do? You steal money from somewhere and return the money that you stole from your job, right? And soon, you set a pattern and it spirals out of control and you never really intended it to happen that way, but it did. And then you say, it just happened, right? It just happened, and you have no real sense of how it did, right? So when it says God, right? I mean, if you own a home, right? If you look in there, your homeowner's insurance is not responsible usually for acts of God, right? Now, good luck after suffering damage and going to court and saying, hey, look, the insurance company claims that this was an act of God, but I'm an atheist, right? So I should get compensated, because how could it be an act of God when there is no God, right? But in the legal concept of an act of God, does it mean that God actually did it, right? A flood or a tornado, right? And the insurance company doesn't want to pay you because your house was destroyed by a tornado. So you bring in theologians into the court to discuss the question of whether God actually causes tornadoes. No, what does an act of God mean when we talk about insurance? Right, it means something that's beyond human control. All right, but what if you're not in a tornado zone? Right? What if you're not in a tornado zone? I mean, we expect tornadoes in Kansas or Oklahoma, right? I mean, my dad, when he was in the Army, was stationed in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And, when you're in the Army and you got 2 hours off, you take it. Right? And my dad went to his barracks and he took a nap and he woke up and there's no roof on the barracks. Okay? That's how deeply my dad could sleep. Right? Because of tornado. All right, you don't expect that heat, right? If your house was destroyed by a tornado, you're not gonna, well, I should have foreseen that, right? Right, I should have foreseen that, right? So it's beyond human control, but it doesn't literally mean that God caused it, right? So the first two plagues, right? The blood and the frogs, right? And Pharaoh's magicians say, no big deal, we can do the same, right? Because they saw it as magic, right? And they believed in magic, right? But what do? They say, oh, we can do that, right? So more blood and more frogs, right? Brilliant, right? Brilliant. But why were the first two plagues turning the Nile into blood and then frogs? Right? You have to understand that here the Haftorah is really helpful. Pharaoh saw himself as a god who created the Nile. And the Egyptians saw the Nile as a god too, because it was the giver of life. Right? And frogs, okay, this I don't expect you to know, because I didn't know until I started preparing this Drasha. But the god of the midwife was the frog. Okay, so the Nile, the giver of life, gives death. Right? And the god of the midwives gives death. Right? So they proved that they could do the same thing, and they made it worse for themselves, right? But there's a certain logic as to why these specific plagues, right? It is God showing his power over the Egyptian gods, right? And probably historically, at that time, most did multiple gods. Right, and including probably our ancestors who say, yeah, there are multiple gods, but our God is the most powerful, right? And so God, Elohim, proves that he is the most powerful by conquering the Nile and conquering the midwives, right? But then they can't reproduce the lice, right? So we have the plague of lice, and the magicians can't reproduce it. So what Etzba Elohim is the finger of God, right? This has to really be from God because we can't produce it, right? And therefore, anything that happens that we have no rational explanation for, right? God did it, right? But the Torah is hinting that this is actually a pagan way of thinking, right? Because why do we believe in God as Jews, right? We don't believe in God because of miracles. We believe in God because of the Torah, right? It's revelation. We encounter God in the text, right? Nature is not God. Nature is not God. It's created by God to in human freedom. What the Egyptians didn't understand is that power over nature is not an end in itself, but solely the means to ethical ends. The lice were God's joke at the expense of the magicians who believed that because they controlled the forces of nature, they were the masters of human destiny. But they were wrong. Faith is not merely belief in the supernatural, it's the ability to hear the call of the author of being, to be free in such a way as to respect the freedom and dignity of others, right? So God has given us the ability to control nature, not as an end in itself, right? But as a way of advancing the reason that we exist, which is human freedom, right? And any interference with nature that promotes that, great, and if it doesn't promote it, it's contrary to what God wants, because God has created us to be free, and we can only be free when all people are free. We can only enjoy peace when all people enjoy peace. Shabbat Shalom.